Hi, hello, how are you? It's been a minute. It has been a minute. But I'm back. I'm tubing again. At the beginning of this year, when I was making my New Year's resolutions, I set one to make 52 YouTube videos this year. I've made 2. And it's April. So anyway, we're just gonna cut our losses and we're just gonna move forward. So welcome to today's video. I'm gonna start doing these videos that are just like literally gonna be titled Unhinged History. And then we're just gonna talk about like just a thing in history that's just like so unhinged that frankly, I don't know why we don't know about it. That's pretty much the premise. So on today's episode, we're going to be talking about the most mysterious disease, epidemic, in the world that has taken place. Which was about 100 years ago. If you're interested in that, please continue. Let's do the music. Disclaimer, this is my retelling of historical events based on what I've read. I'm not a historian, I'm not an expert in the topic. If you are, and you would like to add or correct, please do it. Please correct me if you're an expert in the topic in the comments below. If there's any corrections, you'll see them in the comments. So, but again, story time. I'm not an expert. Okay. All of us living our lives in 2023, we're aware of pandemics and epidemics, right? We've lived through a fair bit. But there's been a lot of historical epidemics. And when I say that, you probably think of like the plague or like, I don't know, like the plague. But there's a lot of other epidemics that have taken place. One that I've spoken about on this channel, I think before, is like the laughing plague. Then there was like the dancing one where everyone just started dancing and they couldn't stop until they literally dropped. And there's a plethora of other diseases, plethora of other diseases that I don't know, we just don't really like talk about it. But 100 years ago, there was an epidemic of this strange thing that we still don't really know what happened. So let's talk about it. That was the worst intro ever. What the hell? Okay, to set the scene, it is 1916. Not a rapper, sorry. At that point in history, the Great War was taking place, which we now call World War I. But at the time, they didn't really know that there was going to be a World War II. So it was called the Great War, okay? So, you know, no one's really in great shape. It was a bad time for the whole world, pretty much. Like every country, not fun. The Olympics were cancelled. You know what I mean? As they should have been. But like you look at 1916, there's a long list of really shitty things that, you know, the troops, the Anzacs were over. All right, we get the point. War. Okay? So when this really like mysterious, weird illness kind of starts infecting people that like have really bizarre symptoms. Obviously there's a lot going on. Fast forward a couple of years, 4 to be exact, not a math girl. And the war is over and we entered like the roaring 20s period, you know, flappers, everyone's living La Vida Loca, right? Well, not everyone. A lot of people were not living La Vida Loca, but that's the era that you can just, if you can picture and visualize it in your mind. And yeah, like people were celebrating, you know, winning the war. I say, I guess, because like, does anyone really win with war? That's more of a philosophical, like hypothetical question to think about when you're awake at night. But anyway, whatever. So yeah, from the years of 1916 all the way through to 1930, this disease kills 500,000 people in Europe alone, right? Big deal. and it afflicted hundreds of thousands of more people, but they didn't die from it. It was a literal epidemic, right? So it's a massive deal. But the reason it's so mysterious is because when the symptoms of the disease immediately begun, there wasn't like this uniformed way to really notice that, oh, it's this, right? So these are the symptoms: strange neuropsychiatric behaviors, extreme lethargicness and sleepiness, which would literally put people into a coma. Like, they were asleep, done, wrap up, completely comatose. Muscle rigidity, and there's a few more. As the disease progresses from 1916 through to 1930, and obviously a lot more people get it, the symptoms kind of grow, right? Because there's more people to, I guess, observe. Today, we know this disease as encephalitis. No. And I'm going to put it on the screen because I can't say it because it's me. Right? But it's still so mysterious because it just disappeared, right? Like, it just stopped. And so, like, there's a handful of, I guess, historians, but also like medical historians that are like, wait up, hold on, what the hell was that? As it's pretty interesting. So skipping back to 1917, there's this physician that works out that this sleeping sickness, as people were referring to it at the time, was actually all one thing, right? So people at the time in Eastern Europe is where they started experiencing these things. So people would just fall asleep, and then they'd be able to be like easily woken for meals and things, but as soon as they'd eaten the meal, they'd just fall back asleep. They were just sleeping all the time. But what he worked out, I think his name was like Constantin von Economo. What he worked out was that the very beginnings, the acute parts of the disease were like the flu, like an influenza. So people would get the flu, and then that it would progress into just them being in these comas. And so he obviously did more and more work and realized that the mortality rate of this epidemic was 20 to 50%. So half the people that got it died from. So the people that did survive, which meant that they got over the period of, I guess, the sleeping, they then went on to have like all these symptoms that lasted for most of their lives afterwards. So the symptoms included like issues regulating sleep and energy and stuff, which, okay, that makes sense. But also a massive range of physical issues, which in many cases they found, well, they termed the effect Parkinsonism, right? Or Parkinson's disease. So after that, they have these, and a lot of us probably know Parkinson's disease and how debilitating it is. So after that, they'd wake up and they'd potentially have that physical ailment. But the other thing was that it was like neurologically did something to their brain. And so they would have these massive behavioral problems, psychotic breaks, antisocial behavior. Basically, like in some of the like writings, it was like the person woke up, but it wasn't them anymore. Like they never actually awoke, which is horrifying. And the people that did wake up and like were experiencing all these like psychotic issues and antisocial behavior and would also experience uncontrollable like surges, right? Like both physical and mental. So with Parkinson's disease, they were not able to control some of the movements, a lot of the movements, right? And so they would more and more and more feel like they were trapped inside their own body that they can't control anymore. And so a lot of that also reflected psychologically. So they would do things that they couldn't control, felt like they weren't in control. This is where it gets interesting. So Highlands Hospital, which was in Witchmore Hill in North London, they had like during 1890 set up an asylum because it's that era, you know. And they decided to allocate in 1925 100 beds to children that had been infected with this disease. Both like boys, girls, and they took kids from the ages of 16, I believe. They took children from the ages of 3 to 16. So 3-year-olds all the way up to 16 to essentially observe them, but also to, I guess, well, I think they mainly wanted to just observe them, but it was to try to like help them have a life. Because I mean, if you get this thing at 3, could you imagine being the parent of a 3-year-old and they just don't wake up? That's horrifying. There's this hospital in London, and then there's others as well around the place. I believe there was one in America. So these kids, right, or these people had been kept in these places asleep for like years and years and years. And then like literally like almost 30 years later, there's this drug that they see works well with Parkinson's disease, L-Dopa. Right, there's obviously a bunch of stories because there was a bunch of people that experienced it. So like the whole community, everyone had sort of forgotten about this illness because these kids who were now like 30, right, or like 45 or whatever, they fell asleep at maybe the age of 15 and had been asleep for 30 years. So everyone had kind of forgotten about it. Well, this doctor, a few doctors, some psychiatrists in like 1970s, one of them, Zach Bunser, is like, oh, okay, this L-Dopa drug has worked with Parkinson's. Why don't we try it on the sleeping people? So he does. And it violently awakes them. Like they wake up from like 30 years of sleep, and then witnesses them rapidly deteriorate back to their former hell. Right? So like obviously the doctor's like, hey, we did it. But like they didn't know how the patients would react. It was really unpredictable. And oftentimes the patient's relapse was far worse than the original circumstances. You know what I'm saying? So there's been a few novels and a few plays that have came out around this time that tried to recreate the scene, if you will. And so basically they are explained as having rambling minds and rambling bodies. One quote is that Audrey, who is, a character that is one of these unwoken victims, I suppose, claws that scrabble on the mounds of her thighs back and forth, over and over in a pattern that can't really be a pattern since it's never repeated. Other patients twitch, grimace, snort, and pant like worn-out dogs. They repeatedly sputter out the same words or phrases like, I can't help it, doctor, I can't help it, I can't help it, doctor, I can't, doctor, I. You get the idea. Their anguish is palatable as they're forced inwards by the raw mechanics of their loss of control of their mind and their body. Okay? As I mentioned, these were the ones that were in, like, these people were institutionalized, but a lot of people did experience the disease or had the disease and then got better, but they never truly got better. Most of the surviving individuals had, really bad Parkinson's disease, amongst other things. So this is like nuts in and of itself. But what's really weird, and why I think this is fascinating, is that, so this was super widespread, right? Very widespread. Lots and lots and lots of people got it. 500,000 people in Europe died from it. Then, all these years later, these people are awoken and these stories start to come out about their experience. But the disease just disappeared. No one knows why. It just disappeared. Until in 2003, there was a doctor in the UK, Russell Dale. He was a pediatric neurologist, right? And he had 20 patients with these odd symptoms that, like, with the disease in 2003. No idea where, no idea why. So in 2003, this doctor has a lot more access, right, to information, obviously, because we've, new age. He hypothesized that potentially, because all the patients started out with this influenza, he hypothesized that it was actually a rare form of strep, and that the body would have this autoimmune response to this particular rare strain of strep. And that's potentially why he thinks that this happens. And then further studies went on to realize that this autoimmune process, which was hypothesized, sparked the antibodies in the patient's body to attack the basal ganglia of the brain, which is a very important part of the brain, might I add. Potentially. Because after these 20 patients, there wasn't any more. So there was no one left to really study, I suppose. That's what I assume. Like, if he had the hypothesis, but like, if there's no one else having the disease, like, you know what I'm saying? I don't know. Anyway, it's 2023, and the last updated, medical journal on this whole thing was from just last year. Dr. Heidi Moawad. And these are still the unanswered questions to this day. It was a rare neurological disease that was so widespread for such a brief amount of time that's never reoccurred since, except for in a tiny group of 20 people. So like, that's a mystery. No answers there. What the hell? And then at the tail end of the illness, some patients improved with some assistance with medicines. One's called levodopa, which I believe is the L-dopa that we were spoken about before. because a part of the side effects was that the individual couldn't make dopamine. I don't know if L-dopa and dopa, I'm not a doctor, okay? I'm just telling a story. At that time, that was the only available medicine for Parkinson's. Since then, there's a lot more medicine. So we don't know if that medicine was administered to these people, would it have helped better? That's the second mystery. Don't know. And thirdly, we may never know if this epidemic was actually caused by an infection, or if the hypothesis that it was some type of autoimmune response to a particular strain of bacteria or infection or microbial agent or neurotoxic pollutant or some extraordinary trigger. Extraordinary meaning like, was it like, did someone do that? I don't know. We don't know. That's part of the mystery. There's a ton of stuff that you can read about this if you're interested in looking into it further. There is a book called Umbrella by Will Self that explains the situation in the basically the reader is reading the experience of Audrey Death, and who was awoken in 1971 when she was administered L-dopa. Fascinating, right? I just can't believe I've never heard of this before. Anyway, the other thing, there was a theatre performance back in 2018, I believe, in England, London, called The Awakened Girl. And it is like a depiction of kind of same idea, like goes through like the experience that so many people experienced, that so there you can read that, and then obviously you can also go have a look. I'll put the neuroscience stuff that I looked at in the comments below if you want to read more about it. Let me know. Thank you for tuning in. If you like this style of episodes, I am happy to do more. So yeah, just please like, subscribe, share. Would be great. And also, if you have any ancestors or anything that experienced this, please comment below. I'm fascinated by this. It's crazy. So like secondhand, third-hand experiences, we're about it. I appreciate you, and thank you for joining me today. See you next time.